Hi, welcome to another special bonus episode of Rivertown from KBIA and the New Territory magazine. I'm Tina Casagrande-Foss. This episode takes place in Weston, Missouri. Weston, south of the Les Hills, north of Kansas City. It sits high on the banks of the Missouri River with seemingly endless rolling farmland, tobacco barns, B&Bs, and one very charming sheep creamery. We were there in September when the biannual Lower Midwest Obsessed magazine, The New Territory, hosted The Page Turner, a mini ideas conference for our print subscribers and new friends. For several months, I got to work on the day's program with University of Missouri professor of geography, Soren Larson. To me, Soren is synonymous with the concept of place. That's capital P place. What makes a particular region or a particular geography alive and unique? He very generously connected me to several more MU professors who care about place, including Megan Murph, Mark Palmer, Tim Langen, and Donald Quist. Under the theme of Hearing Place, and with significant funding from the Missouri Humanities Council, and funding and support from the Budd Center of American Music Studies and the MU Department of Geography, we brought people together for a series of workshops and talks that examine our region through the lens of sound. To give us a setting for the day, here's MU graduate student in journalism, Kiana Fernandez.
Hi, I'm Kiana Fernandez. I grew up in Kansas City's Northland, where the sounds of suburbia could easily be replaced with the noise of the city or the quiet of nature with just a 20-minute drive. It wasn't until I started working with audio that I began to really appreciate the sounds of the place where I grew up, and how much of my childhood memories can be told sonically. Weston, Missouri lies just 20 miles away from my home, my place of origin. When offered the opportunity to help produce a podcast about Hearing Place, I jumped at the chance. My favorite stories are the kinds that involve music, mindfulness, and greater connection. All these things could be found at New Territory's Hearing Place event. The day started out foggy and mild. We gathered at Eventful at Locust Grove, an event venue just outside of Weston. Over the course of the morning, speakers at Hearing Place shared their thoughts about the music of northwestern Missouri and how to write about place. They also sat and listened. They practiced being really open to hearing and reflecting on the power of sounds, natural sounds, human-made sounds, all of it. This episode will give you a sample of sounds from September 22nd, 2024. The podcast also hopes to connect you to the universality and timelessness of the sounds we all experience. It may even get you to hear familiar sounds anew. We could have done this event anywhere in the lower Midwest, but chose Platte County. The Missouri River Hills between Kansas City and St. Joseph are rich in history. The landscape is rural and agricultural, even though it is near the Kansas City metro area. Some of the attendees at Hearing Place were returning to the familiarity of picturesque Platte County, while others were there for the first time. That included Donald Quist. The poet and professor of English at the University of Missouri held court under a pavilion and spoke to a group about how writers can use sounds to ground us in place. Quist's writing exercise that day encouraged writers to allow a place's sounds to carry their stories forward.
This is a session about place writing, and I think this is a pretty good place to do it. Place writing, what is it? What does it mean? Everything happens somewhere, of course. However, we often forget that to better understand an incident, we need stronger descriptions of the location where it happens. So oftentimes when I'm reading things, I will see folks try to achieve a level of universality by removing place. But place is what centers us. Place is where it all starts. Each of us grows out of a place. We're shaped by the things around us. If you get really holistic about it, if much of our body is made out of water, then we're going to react to the things around us. We're going to react to this earth that birthed us. Centering place can be a great practice in helping you write stronger narratives that resonate with people and connect with people. So setting can be a character, helping to establish mood and tone. Place can offer metaphors and poetic images that move the narratives of prose and verse forward. I like to tell people a tree is not just a tree. So if a tree shows up in a narrative, if a bird shows, I was just reading The Sandpiper by Elizabeth Bishop. So we have this whole beautiful poem centered around a bird sighting. And it becomes this beautiful reflection of humanity and what's going on inside of her. This land we're on, this space, these things that we see, they have a sense of agency in us. We are connected to them. And so finding links between us and the world around us and then sharing that with other people, I think can make us a more compassionate species, a more humane species. T.S. Eliot talks about the objective correlative. We have an objective, a thing that the artist wants to convey, and we need to correlate it to something, an object, an image, so that it can resonate inside of the reader. Objective correlatives is when you take a memory or a moment and you tie emotionality of it to an object, to concrete things. A good example of this, I often do this with my students. In comic books, there's Captain America. Is everybody familiar with Captain America? So Captain America, he carries a shield. That shield is an objective correlative. The idea is that the shield represents how America will be like a protecting force or a shielding force. But the shield is also made out of vibranium, which is a stolen African substance. So Captain America protects the world with a shield made out of minerals stolen from a dark continent. That's an objective correlative. You have a memory, a time that you realize some shared universality. You have details of where you are right now. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I want you to pull them together.
So my name is Andy, and my memory was about, like 10 years ago, I felt like I was getting ready to have a mental breakdown. A lot was coming at me. There were a lot of life changes. Everyone was giving me advice, and I needed to find my own internal dialogue. So I decided to go to a silent meditation retreat in Maine, and it was probably one of the best gifts I've ever given myself, to really just be with other people and allow each other to hold that space and communicate in other ways, but also just process your own voice. And it's really what saved me. And it also made me realize how much chitter chatter is always going on in everyone's brain. Like, it's not just a me problem, it's a everyone problem, right? So that was very relieving for me. Like, oh, it's not just me and my anxiety and all the things in life. So anyway, so this is what I wrote. The songs of birds allow me to pause my body, mind, and allow space to just be and breathe. I wish everyone would realize the need and value of unplugging and untuning, to just be a human being, not a human doing. How do you really connect to anyone or yourself if you are always plugged in, never breathing, always moving, always thinking, comparing, perfecting, attaining? How would you ever be satisfied? Celebrate the mundane and simple. Allow yourself to pause, stop, breathe, and be in this moment and place where the bird sings. That's what I wrote.
Do you write poetry?
No.
We have a lot of poetic syntax, a lot of turns. So if you don't, you should. Yes. Yeah, exactly, Linda. Yes, you do, Andy, actually.
Writing about place requires deeply listening and thinking about what the essence of a place makes you feel, then writing that down. While we can hear place and use those sounds to help translate our inner worlds into stories, we can also take those sounds in a whole new direction and make them the focus. Megan Murph was also on the program that fall day at the Page-Turner event in Weston. The University of Missouri musicology instructor directs the School of Music's Budd Center for American Music Studies. At Weston Bend State Park, Murph welcomed a dozen curious attendees. As a cold front moved through, a park picnic shelter offered cover from light rain that had started earlier and the wind that was kicking up. With a chill in the air, Murph arranged her group in a rough circle for a sound meditation. This is yet another way to hear place, that requires us to challenge the boundaries we place between our bodies and our world.
I joke that during the week I'm Dr. Murph, and on the weekends I'm like Yoga Megan. I teach a lot of yoga and meditation and Reiki practices, but I think it goes kind of hand in hand with my research as well, and what I'm interested in musically and sonically. How do we experience sound? How do we sort of are embodied with sound, and how are we experiencing it all the time? There's sound happening all over this place. There's insects under leaves and all kinds of things happening that we don't recognize at all, either because the vibrations themselves aren't like loud enough for the human ear, or we are just too stressed out to even go there. So notice how it feels to sit here. So we kind of want to set ourselves up, like we're conditioning ourselves to listen is the goal. And so we want to notice the feet. They're planted. We're seated here. Maybe the knees are bent. Maybe they're close together. Maybe they're further apart. It's whatever feels good to you. The bottom is pressed onto this wood, which hopefully isn't too uncomfortable for you. And then we're sort of zipping up through the core so that the spine is nice and tall. The top of the head sort of reaches. So we've got this really tall spine so that we have a lot of space in the torso to breathe. You might decide to close the eyes if that feels nice to you. You could also soften your gaze, just look somewhere out in front. And then start to notice the breath. So every single time we breathe, the pelvis tilts forward so that the lungs can expand. And then every time we exhale, the pelvis tilts back so that the air can exit. And this happens every single time. It's like an involuntary action. But when we're super stressed, we tend to let our shoulders come in, our chests cave in, and we take more shallow breaths. So the idea is to slow down the parasympathetic nervous system. We're slowing down the breath. So as you inhale through the nose, try to slow it down, and then exhale out the mouth. Let's do this maybe 6-7 times at your own pace, inhaling slowly and exhaling. It's okay to make sound. Maybe we'll pause here a little longer. We'll linger a little longer for you to breathe. Notice that rise and fall. You might even decide to place a hand over the belly so that you can feel under the palms the lungs expand. We just so happen to have more sounds existing around us. The rain, continuing to slow down the breath, seeing if each one can be a little longer than the breath prior.
Murph got her students to experience sound with their whole bodies. Stretching gave a chance for participants to feel into their bodies so that it was easier to then pay attention to what they were hearing. A mindful walking exercise broke the barriers between the breath, the body, and the surrounding nature. At a panel later that day, Murph asked attendees to not just hear sounds, but really listen to what those sounds make us think. What do the sounds we hear and our reaction to them tell us about us?
When I think about hearing place, I actually propose that we adapt listening to place, which allows us to tie into that mindfulness. Now, hearing place is pretty catchy, I have to admit. But hearing place is about the ability to perceive sound, while listening is about making sense of, pondering, and engaging in community, maybe even co-creating with those sounds, which allows us to challenge any preconceived notions that we hold of these sounds, but also about each other, ourselves, and our community.
While Megan Murph and Donald Quist led largely introspective workshops at the Page-Turner event, a third workshop actively created sound and explored how sound changes over time and across place. Tim Langen plays the fiddle. At his hearing place session, Langen, a Minnesota native and professor of Russian at the University of Missouri, discussed his grandfather's influence on his playing, the power of radio, and what makes Northwest Missouri fiddle music unique and how to hear local music.
Hey everybody, my name's Tim, and so I'm here to talk about Northwest Missouri fiddle music. So I should make it clear I'm not from Northwest Missouri, in case you didn't guess from my accent. I'm from Minnesota. But I'll tell you why I don't feel like a total imposter talking about this music in just a second. If you're a musician, you know, you go to like for traditional music, let's say, you go to a new place and you find people who play traditional music, and, well, do you know this tune? Do you know that tune? And so I would play these tunes in Columbia when we moved here. And I didn't know before coming to Columbia that there was a Missouri fiddle tradition that was a distinct thing, you know, from, let's say, Appalachian or Texas. Those are pretty well-known ones. But there's a specific Missouri, and I learned that there's not just one Missouri style. There are many. So I would say, you know, some of the tunes Grampy played, people sort of know for different reasons, different parts of the country. He picked them up different places. So I would play, anyway, I played a couple of tunes. And it was probably Howard Marshall. He said, well, how do you know that tune? And I said, well, Grampy taught me that tune, and so some other tunes. And Howard said, well, we don't play that tune around here in Columbia, but you know where they do play it is Northwest Missouri. And here's why. Back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, there was a very popular Canadian radio program, and it was Don Messer, a fiddle player called Don Messer, and then there would be other fiddle players as well. And Don Messer was my grandfather knew him somewhat, and they had some overlapping, you know, tunes together. So Don Messer would play these tunes, and apparently the AM radio waves made it as far as southeastern Iowa and southwestern Nebraska and northwestern Missouri, but no deeper into Missouri. So around here, they play all these tunes, or did play all these tunes that Grampy played. They're different keys. So like the strings of the fiddle are G, D, A, E. And so in a way, it's easy to play tunes in keys where there are a lot of open strings, you know, like if you're playing in D, you know, like you don't even need this hand half the time. And then there are the keys where they don't do you that favor. You actually have to press the string down for pretty much every note. And that's like B flat, for example. And it has a different sort of character to it. I mean, it's because it interacts differently with the resonance of the instrument. So in the second part, that's how Grampy did it, but in the Northwest Missouri style, so that it resolves back to the B flat, the tune's in B flat, and then it just does that again. So there's this thing about, are you gonna halfway through the thing, are you gonna leave a feeling of tension? So the theme of this conference is hearing place, and so this is kind of about how to hear a local style of music. And the thing about a local style of music is the people in that place very often sort of, or at least some of them, are going to be purists about it and say this is the real style, or this is the real old-time style, or whatever. And I think you need people like that. You know, like you need people to insist on, like, this is the right way, and those other ways are the wrong way. But if you zoom out, you see all kinds of stuff flowing into the place and out of the place, and all of these different origins of tunes. So one of the cool things that makes Northwest Missouri music, fiddle music, Northwest Missouri fiddle music, is Canadian, you know? So, I mean, I just find that really cool.
That was Tim Langen talking about hearing place through the Northwest Missouri fiddle music he studies and plays. Music is a powerful avenue to hearing place. Iconic genres like Appalachian folk, Kansas City jazz, and Seattle grunge highlight the importance of place and community in creating new sounds. These sounds are not natural, but they are still influenced by place. As we heard earlier from Quist and Murph, the natural world provides us with an existing soundscape. That soundscape has existed for longer than human time can track it. Modern Western time is tracked through mathematical calculations. Indigenous and ecological calendars use seasonal sounds to measure time. Mark Palmer, Kiowa tribal member and chair of the MU Geography Department, talked at the Hearing Place event about how his heritage provides him with a guide to measure the passing of the seasons.
My name is Mark Palmer. I am a professor at the University of Missouri in geography, originally from the state of Oklahoma. Spent a lot of time in Norman and points to the southwest. Our homeland, the Kiowa homeland, which is my tribal affiliation in Oklahoma, is about 75 miles to the southwest of Oklahoma City. You know, ever since I was a kid, we have my parents, my grandparents, we've talked about images and symbols, like we talked about earlier today. And I was surprised when I got into my teens to find out that the Kiowas had a calendar. And it was like a winter count calendar that you would see in the northern plains, where we would have a significant summer event and a significant winter event that we'd look at. As I went to the university, as I started to study geography and environmental science and geographic information systems, maps, these types of things, I revisited those calendars. And they are a historical documentation of our tribal history. It's an oral tradition, this calendar making. It is also an oral geography, and that's something we don't hear about in academics, is this oral geography. I mean, you can have oral mathematics, you can have anything you want as long as you put it to words or put some kind of sound to that. So I started fiddling around with ecological calendars. The ecological calendars feel a lot more organic to me. You are out in the environment. You are listening to birds. You can feel the atmosphere. You can feel, if you're from Oklahoma, you can feel when it might be a tornado day, right? Hair flagged to one side, humid, just oppressive humidity, right? And we say, there's going to be a tornado. There's going to be a storm today. And we look over in the corner and they're cattle. They're all bunched up together underneath a tree. And it's like, what are they doing? All these different observations that are kind of associated with the big show, which is to come, the big storm, the thunder, all these sounds that come with that. Tornado sirens, right? It's a big part of my upbringing, these types of things. But these ecological calendars, they track changes. Who was it? It's one of the philosophers, Stoic philosophers, who said you can never stand in the same river twice, right? The water's moving and it's gone. Humans have a hard time with that because we're always trying to fight our way back upstream to capture something we'll never capture again, right? If you think in terms of flow. So you have these seasonal changes and different events that allow us to understand the behavior. It also allows us to shape the way we are living on the landscape for a particular year when we set up our ceremonies. You have the calendars intertwined with different ceremonies. There's certain times that we can tell stories. We tell them in October, starting in October, because that's when all the work is complete. It's actually the Kiowa's first moon. We go by moons, right? We had 12 moons, and that's the first moon, first of 6 cold moons to come. It's built into that. Our summer solstice. We don't have a sun dance. We have a summer solstice Gourd clan celebration. It's associated with seasonality. Now, I've been working at Basket Research Forest, which is south of Columbia, Missouri, near the town of Ashland. It's about 2,300 acres. And I have 3 what are called song meters, right? They're enclosed recorders. And I place them 400 yards apart, some up on ridges, some in valleys, up on another ridge. It's really interesting because you can hear these different animals in different places. The sounds that I'm looking for when I'm thinking about plants are leaves. Is there a presence of leaves in the recording? Or there are no leaves because the wind blowing through the limbs when you get a cold front like we have today, but the winds are gusting from the north and the pressure's dropping, you can really hear the wind fighting through some of those branches. There are millions of birds that are migrating right now as you sleep. I didn't know this before, but birds will migrate as people are sleeping at night, which is really interesting. Millions of them are moving through Missouri now, and they're starting to move further to the south. Territorial calls, mating calls, everything gets picked up by these sound recordings, and you have to pull that information apart. Sound flows, time flows, people flow. And sometimes they're out of place, right? There's a diaspora there. You're not in place. I should be someplace else. One of the ways that we can find that is by looking at things like calendar knowledge to try and see where people have been, where they've traveled, and what we might create in the future.
Mark Palmer, who you just heard, captures sound to tell the ongoing narrative of his people. Poet Donald Quist and fiddler Tim Langen observe and create sound to tell stories that connect us to the universal. And I find that comforting. To know that the sound of a bird's song or a folk fiddle tune brings us in alignment with all the people who have heard that same music before. To know that, every day, no matter how fast life feels, there are endless chances to pause and listen and connect.
Thank you so much to producer Kiana Fernandez for her work narrating and co-producing, and to co-producer Trevor Harris for steering the steamboat on this whole episode. And thank you for listening to this bonus recording of Rivertown from Eventful at Locust Grove in Weston, Missouri. I want to say thank you to the many voices in this episode, including Donald Quist, Andy Back, Linda Hiesel, Megan Murph, Tim Langen, and Mark Palmer. We are listening to the music of Rachel Krause and Brandon Blackburn, the new duo known as Rattlesnake Master. Thanks also to MU Geography Professor Soren Larson, KBIA's Janet Saidi, sound consultant Byron Wiley, the staff at Eventful, and the New Territory Magazine Board of Directors. Also, special thanks to event co-sponsors, the Budd Center for American Music Studies and the Department of Geography at the University of Missouri. Special thanks to the Missouri Humanities Council for providing funding for the workshops, panel, and this episode. Finally, thanks as always to our project manager, Jessica Von Martin. I'm Tina Casagrande-Foss. Rivertown is a collaborative project from KBIA, the Missouri School of Journalism's Missouri News Network, and the New Territory Magazine. Executive producers of Rivertown are Janet Saidi and me, Tina Casagrande-Foss, in partnership with PRX. You can hear the full episodes of Rivertown wherever you get your podcasts.